Right. Well, welcome to RVC's community webinar series. We are talking about ag tech today, and we have got a great panel with lots of different perspectives. So I think this will be a lot of fun. Before we dive in, though, I just want to cover a couple of things about Rockies Venture Club. Hopefully, you all know us. We are the longest running angel group in the US, and we are angels creating jobs and economic development in Colorado and throughout the region with 200 angels who are investing actively in early stage startups. We invest in across lots of different areas, including ag tech. We've had an ag tech conference and several ag tech investments. So we love this space, but we're doing lots and lots of events, 140 events per year, including conferences, workshops, forums, and so on. We're looking at a lot of deals and investing in about 25 or 30 deals per year. We have syndication partners throughout the US. We're part of the Angel Capital Association. And here, basically, to get startups going and provide everything we can in terms of education and connection for both angels and startup founders. Love to thank our sponsors. Meyer Law is helping us on the legal side. Colorado Department of Economic Development and International Trade has given us some funding to help with recruiting and retaining more investors to help invest in great Colorado companies. CFO Share helping us on the finance side, and then Richter Financial Studios is helping companies in life science and technology to put together pro formas, think about capital strategy, and move themselves ahead. They help us with our pitch book membership every year, which is a huge benefit for both investors and entrepreneurs. I do want to pitch. We have just in 5 weeks coming up the Colorado Capital Conference 2021. This is, I think, our 33rd year of doing this event, and it will be a lot of fun. We are focusing on the future of startups. And if ever there is a time that startups have changed, it's over this last year, but we'll be looking back even farther than that over the last decade. And then, of course, projecting forward to look at the new world of startups, which is really just becoming a huge player in our economic system. This will be a hybrid event. We'll have an evening reception where we'll be face-to-face with almost no content, just catching up on 1 year's worth of networking, and then 4 hours on the 25th and 26th. And we'll have some great keynote speakers, panelists, pitches, and chances for people to interact. All right, so let's talk about ag tech. I'll just say we have a great panel here today. Different perspectives on how we should be thinking about ag tech, and RVC has been really interested in this space for some time. In fact, one of our first investments in our what we call a new model was in evolutionary genomics, which is the company that's doing really interesting things, initially with soybeans, but then bananas, tomatoes, all sorts of other products, and coming up with a patented process for coming up with beneficial gene combinations. Then we also have companies like Geovisual Analytics, who are helping with developing systems to figure out when crops will be available, how big the crops will be, and so that companies who have to give X number of cases to Costco or Safeway or whatever can know how successfully they're going to be doing that. So we think this is a giant space. We've also been in the impact investing space and clean tech. And so these are all overlapping in very interesting ways. So I will just queue up our speakers, and then I will let them introduce themselves, because they know themselves more than any of the rest of us. Kathrine Pease has been a partner with Rockies Venture Club for some time, and she's with Pathstone, and she just released a really interesting report on regenerative agriculture, and she has many, many people writing about different views on this space, and it's looking at it as much about agriculture as it is about social and environmental impact. And Pathstone has been in wealth advisors and family office, and been helping companies think about impact for a long, long time. And then we have Eric Adamson, who, I guess I first saw him about 3-4 years ago at a thing in Holland and Hart, and was so impressed. And Tortuga AgTech has moved ahead so quickly, just raised a round of $20 million, which makes them the largest ag tech robotic company in the world, which is fairly impressive right here in Colorado. So we'll hear from him on trends in robotics and AI. And then David Forsee, who is part of RVC's clean tech investor group and is looking at a lot of the overlap of clean tech and ag tech. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn this over to Kathrine to introduce herself in a more detailed way than my quick overview.
Well, great. Thanks, Peter. It's really lovely to be with you. And I have to say the first AgTech forum I ever went to was the RVC AgTech forum, maybe back in 2016 or 2017. So in some ways for me, AgTech and RVC are synonymous. So it's great to be with you again, talking about this. Yeah, and I'm a little bit of an outlier. I'm on today's conversation, I'm going to do a little bit more high level framing. As Peter mentioned, I work with Pathstone. We are a investment advisor, wealth manager. We manage assets for high net worth families and foundations and nonprofit endowments. And a lot of our heritage, our work is focused on sustainable and impact investing. And we do that really through a total portfolio deployment strategy. And we do it in all asset classes and across a whole lot of themes. And one of the things that is emerging, no, I wouldn't say emerging, it's been here for a while, but I would just say it's hockey puck accelerating, is a real focus on sustainable and regenerative agriculture. So as Peter mentioned, we have just put out a report, which I'm absolutely thrilled about because it does bring in the voices of about 16 different investor groups, some foundation groups, but all these different groups that are really focusing on regenerative agriculture from a whole variety of different approaches. And I'm going to put in the chat right now a link to it. So if you want to see the report, you can. What we try to do in this report is really to cover the kind of a blended capital approach to working in regenerative agriculture. So you'll see stories of investing in things like the Black Farmer Fund that is really trying to disrupt the sort of historical patterns of investment into more ag business, which has really caused the disinvestment in local farms and particularly BIPOC, Black run farms, that type of thing. You're going to see some information on emerging investment practices around textiles, because textiles are a really important element from the kind of the climate and land use perspective. You're going to see a lot of information on investing in Native American ag. This is, again, less about ag tech, but it is very important from the point of view of sort of changing the overall food system. Certainly through Peter, we and another VC company that focuses on food and ag tech, we certainly approach the question of ag tech as well. But I'll just say briefly a few little bit of the background of this report and why we're focusing on it so heavily as a wealth manager investment advisor. And that would be that we really see that there's not just a focus on food, but there's a focus on other really important high impact opportunities. And so we see that health, for example, is health investors are approaching food now in new ways because they understand that food and health are so deeply connected. We see that climate is a huge variable and connecting point with food. And in fact, as we talk about in the report, 26% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the agriculture sector. And so for our investors that are really thinking about climate, you can't ignore the opportunity to make a positive impact on the climate through food. And I would argue that some of the ag tech that is out there is really one of the most direct opportunities for making an impact on climate, which we'll talk about more. But the other thing I want to highlight is the factor around inequality. And so as we talk about in the report, 65% of poor working adults in the world make a living through agriculture. So if you start to think about agriculture as not just a way to deliver food, but as a way to deliver economic opportunity, it really kind of flips the script and helps create all sorts of ways of thinking differently about the value of agriculture as not solely an environmental or a climate focused opportunity, but really a socially focused opportunity too. And so one of the fundamental premises of a lot of the regenerative ag and groups that we talk about in our report is that in fact they're focused on living wage opportunities. They're focused on making sure that farmers have an opportunity to buy into the changes that are happening in their farms, and they can own the land instead of just renting the land, leasing the land, all these kinds of things. And so these are really the fundamentals of why we decided to walk into this area. What I will say is that as the deeper we got into it, the more we realized that ag tech is just a fundamental element of any kind of effort to try to improve the food system, because ag tech has, as I mentioned before, some of the most important opportunities for addressing, in particular, climate change. And so as Peter does a really nice job, I think, in laying out in our report, there are opportunities to make a positive impact on many of the sort of major themes that we're addressing on the planet through the Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's making an impact on water saving, on carbon sequestration, on monitoring soil. There's a really nice piece from an ag tech investor who is focused on using big data to capture data on soil. And how do you, as a producer, how do you think about soil, from a fundamentally different perspective? And data is absolutely critical to that mix. And so, we highlight that, as well as all of these other sort of more direct opportunities into making an impact on the land with the farmers in community. So I'm going to pause there because I'm excited to learn more from David and Eric, but I look forward to talking more about all the different kinds of things and approaches that are available out there.
Great. Thanks, Kathrine. Just one thing you touched on that was really interesting is when I started doing research on the numbers of looking at what the investment trends were, for that report, I kind of knew this, but it really became clear that ag tech touches like everything. You look at PitchBook, they create those clouds of types of technologies. There were, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 different buckets of ag tech. And as you mentioned, everything from water to energy to, we'll just hear about AI and robotics in a second. So it's a really big space, and it's hard to, put it all in one neat, tidy bucket.
It's a big space, and it's a big space that I think people, a lot of people in the kind of impact investing world don't understand, and actually, frankly, have a little bit of a negative eye toward. And so I'm glad we're doing webinars like this to really help people understand that there is a connection between ag tech and impact investing and climate change and all these other factors that are out there, because there is some disinformation, I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
So let's move on to AI and robotics and hear from Eric Adamson at Tortuga AgTech.
Great. Thanks, Peter. And I think everyone will hear similar themes to what Kathrine just said in sort of our basic elevator pitch, or who we are and what we're trying to do. We always start with explaining our mission, which is to build a healthier society and a thriving planet through smarter farming. And there's 3 components to that mission, and this is where the echoes start to happen, right? So healthier society, yes, right? Everybody eats food every day if we're lucky, and the food that we eat has an incredible impact on our personal health. Not only that, but farm revenue alone in the world is about $5 trillion, about 20% of global GDP, just the farm gate revenue, let alone the downstream processed food in restaurants and supermarkets and everything else. So this is a massive component of our human experience on the planet. The second component of our mission after healthier society is thriving planet. And again, as Kathrine alluded to, somewhere between 20 and 30% of global carbon emissions are from food and agriculture and land use. Secondarily, 70% of freshwater use around the world is for food production. If you look at the chemicals that are used to try to stop other things from eating our food before we do, those have massive downstream impacts on local and regional ecosystems. And if you look at the nitrogen cycle, which is a critical cycle in life for those of you who are biologists, the agriculture system has a massive impact on local and regional ecosystems related to the nitrogen balance and the nitrogen cycle. So pretty much no matter which way you look at it, the agriculture world, the nexus of industries that make up agriculture, are the predominant and strongest and biggest impact on our environments today. Carbon, yes, but everything else too. And the last component of our mission is smarter farming. And this is where we start honing in on what we're doing as a company. So if you look at the entire agriculture world, you have, as Peter alluded to, genetics companies. You have people who are doing chemical inputs and equipment. You've got supply chain, you've got processors, supermarkets, restaurants. In the middle of all of that is the farm. And the farm is truly the crux of the entire system. You can make things better here and there by 1 to 5% or 20%, but if the farm is not doing well, if the farm is run in an unsustainable way, if the farm quality is poor, if there are climate changes or let's say weather changes due to climate change in local areas, and there's a huge drought or huge flood, and that farm can't produce the food, no amount of advanced technology anywhere else is going to help us in that season. So we figured, let's go to the hardest part of the most important system, which is the farm. And if you look at the farm, the hardest problem is all labor. So basically farming is still just hard work. That's mostly just physical work that is being done. And if you look at a lot of those pieces of work, some of them will never be automated because it's really, really complex, requires a lot of human judgment, but a lot of the work is actually quite automatable. And, you know, for something like a soy or corn or wheat farm, a lot of those processes have been automated a long time ago with big tractors. And that's why John Deere is a very massive company that everyone knows, whereas it didn't exist, 120 years ago. In the $1 trillion of crops that are still hand harvested today, which is all of the vegetables and fruits and sort of delicious things that we like to buy, those are all touched by a human multiple times before they get to the supermarket. And those processes are not automated. And so they also make up, sometimes 30, sometimes 70% of a farm's total costs. So what we wanted to do was to take advanced technology that either existed in other industries or does not exist yet and apply it to the hardest part of the most important system on the planet. This is a very crazy, but we say crazy, not stupid thing to try to do. So we took a very, very big swing of the baseball bat at this idea of automating harvest in fruits and vegetables with robots. And that's the key process on farm, that if you can do that well, all of these other things that are just ancillary to harvest start being easier. Things like tracking what fruit you have and where it's growing in its growing cycle, or vegetables, and then forecasting what you're going to have, right? So the same kind of thing that GeoVisual is doing. Forecasting with better data because you're looking within 20 centimeters at each crop or each piece of fruit every day. Doing different kinds of pruning and cultivating that you can't otherwise do with a human being, because either the human can't do it, they really can't be taught how to do it, or they can't be incentivized how to do it. Those are things we're trying to do. Different pest treatments that can use technologies that humans can't do. For example, UV light treatment of certain types of pests is possible with robots, impossible with humans, because UV light gives us cancer, just like it gives the mildew and the bugs problems. So robots can do that, humans can't. So by going to the center of the problem, we hope to create a ton of value societally, better quality crops, lower cost crops, environmentally more sustainable, less waste, fewer chemicals needed, and also obviously economic for us and for our investors. We want to create a lot of value. So that's a very short story of who we are and what we do. Last couple things. We've raised $31 million. We're about 42 people full time now, potentially going to get close to 50 by the end of the year. Some of those folks are international. We are operating internationally now with our early contracts. So lots going on over here.
Very, very cool. Before I get to David, I just want to ask you one other question that I think is really important about how you thought about your strategy. You're a technology company, you've got all this AI and robotics, and the history of ag tech has been more tech than ag sometimes.
Yeah.
You said, let's flip this model, let's focus on the growers.
Yeah.
These guys have been burned over and over and over again by tech that's there for tech's sake. And
yes,
talk about that decision, because I really think that's a genius and subtle decision that the company
yes. Yeah, and subtle, but natural to us, because both Tim and I came from farming families. Tim's first memories, my co-founder Tim's first memories of engineering was fixing his grandfather's broken tractors on the farm. So what we realized fairly early on, to Peter's point, is that the farmer's problem isn't a technical problem, it's an economic problem. They can't find enough people to do the job, and the people cost a lot even when they can find them, and that is really hard for them. They're getting squeezed on margin on all sides by all vendors and their customers too. So we need to find a way to solve the economic problem with technology. And because we didn't start as pure technologists, like in a lab trying to bring something to the real world, we were able to have that perspective. Tim and I both came from, I was working in agribusiness. Tim was also working in the business world with an engineering background. So I think when we started talking to farmers, we also realized just how sophisticated they really are, how innovative they really are, there are a lot of people get a bad rap in the farming world for being non-innovative and not smart, but in reality, they're very smart, very innovative, and they're survivors. What they aren't is tolerant of BS. So we decided early on, having met all these people and seen what we thought was a clear vision of the problem that was different than others, okay, let's just keep trying to solve their problem. Let's listen to them as much as possible. Let's learn from them as much as we can. And every time they give us true, honest, good feedback, let's take it to heart and let's bring them into the process. Let's not go to the media and talk about how we're amazing and then not show it to the farmer. We've done the opposite. We've been very quiet in the media because the only thing that matters in our industry is whether the farmer believes it. So yeah, I think it's nice to hear you say, Peter, that it's a nuanced and a good insight. I don't think everybody agreed with us, 5 years ago, but it's kind of coming to fruition that, the right thing to do is to put your customer first and to solve their real problem and not just their technical problem. And I think the companies that are being successful in ag tech are not just technologists looking for a solution to, or a problem to a solution they have, but actually people who are trying to care about the impact for the customer.
Yeah, super important. And I think probably some of those early ag tech solutions put up barriers for people following on, and it's
absolutely,
I talked about the article about the Gartner hype cycle of ag tech, and part of the trough of despair, those of you who know what the Gartner hype cycle is, was caused by some of those not well thought out early solutions. So appreciate that. All right, well, let's move on to David Forsee and get some perspective. And this is from the investor side about you've been working on all kinds of really interesting things that are intersecting with this space. And so if you want to give a little bit of background about you and Brookeside and what you do, and then go from there.
Yeah, let me give a little bit of just some background, just a couple thoughts, and then would love to hear some kind of Q&A and happy to weigh in additionally. For a couple of things. First, Eric, congratulations on your fundraise. That's a
thank you.
deal, and you probably feel like the dog that caught the car right now, but good luck. That's a great,
very appropriate.
good luck. And Peter, I'm thrilled to see. I think there's 25 people on here, and that's exciting. Get that kind of a group together for the it's a hot topic. So I'm founder of Brookeside Capital, and we are an advisor and investor in early stage companies. So we're kind of looking for the persons running out of the lab yelling eureka that needs 6 or 9 months of help to figure out, can you really raise money? And we'll put some of our own money in. And doing that, really focused in clean tech and agriculture. I'm actually in Colorado today, but we've got kind of home bases, Kansas City and St. Louis, which are booming for both plant technology, some deep science, as well as animal health technology. Was one of the founders and family was an early investor and board for Tech Excel, TECHACCEL, which is a venture development group that's raised a significant amount of money to invest and really looking for stranded technologies, or more appropriately, maybe early stage university-based technologies that were entering that valley of death, where they just hadn't moved far enough along to attract real venture money, 20 or $30 million rounds, or strategic interest. And so we're putting science and that first level of venture investment in, and primarily looking for, kind of moonshots, big ideas. So we were first investors in Benson Hill in gene editing, and they just have $1 billion SPAC that's going to close here this summer. Have been big investors in RNA technology for agriculture, which we think is one of the kind of coming things along with gene editing for the next 10, 20-year trends. Personally, I was one of the founders of Machinery Link, which at one point was the largest owner of farm equipment in the world. And the concept, as Eric would know, was farmers are in a low margin commodity business generally, and equipment's one of their largest expenses after labor, certainly in commodity crops. And we had a sharing network of combines and tractors from Texas to North Saskatchewan. And that led to FarmLink, which was one of the earlier digital companies using big data for precision agriculture. So with that, maybe I'll stop and happy to weigh in on some thoughts and what we're seeing. I think I will maybe just make one comment, if I can, tying in kind of what Eric and Kathrine said. The complexity or the number of things this touches, and I think that's one of the key things, is really, really interesting. But what it also means is that for any one problem or challenge or opportunity, there are potential multiple sources. So Eric mentioned nitrogen. Nitrogen is, plants need nitrogen. Nitrogen on its own is one of the larger users, nitrogen production of energy in the world, to produce nitrogen for ammonia for farm production. But the ways and so that's being attacked by a lot of people, but it's being attacked one way. We're an investor in a seed genetics company that they're looking at, can you do better uptake from air, which is what soybeans do? Can you have other plants that can do better uptake of nitrogen from air for their growth? So you don't need to apply ammonia. We're also looking at precision ag companies. There's hundreds of them out there that are allowing you'll only apply the exact amount of nitrogen you need to that specific plant or that specific square meter. So you don't apply the same amount of nitrogen across a 2,000 acre corn field. You would very specifically apply, so your rates of application go down. It's better for the plants, better for the soil. But also there's people that are looking at technology, and even Starfire, which is a Colorado company, they're making ammonia. And the way that could play is the more you could do that, make the ammonia green. Right now it's in billion-dollar facilities that are using natural gas, a lot of fossil fuels to generate that. Starfire, you could make it remote. You could use solar panels to make it ammonia, and then that would allow you more precision applications. So again, just that one nitrogen problem, you could come at that problem from a lot of different aspects and ways and generate a lot of interest. And so I think that's one of the exciting things about this whole ag tech space, is there are a lot of different solutions, and that's creating a lot of gaps, which hopefully for venture capital investors creates a lot of opportunities, because there's a lot of gaps and a lot of ways to attack the same problem. So
Yeah,
exciting times.
great comments. Hey, so two things just for audience members. We are going to have a chance for your Q&A and input. So do put those into the chat while we're continuing this discussion, and then we'll make sure to get to those questions. And or when we get to that point, we'll give you a chance to jump on and ask your question verbally. But I do want to follow up, just David. Those things you described sound totally amazing and game changing. I mean, if you can cut, nitrogen and cut the amount of energy, and you can do all of these things and use genetics, and you're investing in these things. And one of the issues that comes up in this is these are long range investments. I mean, this is none of the things you talked about are an early exit, right? And so when you're thinking about these investments, do you think about that time frame with yourself and the folks you're investing along with?
Yeah, that's not true just for ag investing, but obviously it would be true, kind of really across any type of investing. And with Tech Excel specifically, the biological things that we are looking at, the gene editing or RNAi, and for those, RNA is the messenger RNA is what Moderna, that's based on 30 years of work that's been done. And then all of a sudden, Moderna and Pfizer were able to turn that around in a year to make a vaccine. So it's really looking at some of those kind of core fundamental biological activities for in the RNA case, it's using the interference properties so that you can target very specific pests with a very specific developed delivery system targeting just that pest. But yeah, long time horizons on the biologicals. But frankly, some of the digital things, the precision ag, look more like other digital rollouts. They can have faster rollouts, faster potential applications, and don't take 50 scientists in a room for 5 years. So there's a range of things, and can talk a little bit more about kind of, because some of these fields are so vast. And as Eric mentioned, really the value chain could run all the way from seed genetics to the store shelf and the consumer, and none of those are the same. So I think picking where you're adding value and where in the value chain and who you're creating value for is probably as important, frankly, as how long it takes. And Peter, there's money available at any of these steps, and no matter how long it takes, if you're going after a big enough thing, again, Benson Hill, they're just launching and they've got $1 billion market cap now. So I'm not sure that's as relevant because of the amount of capital that's flowing in as it used to be as a barrier. But you do have to know what you're trying to do and who it's going to impact in this. You can't just say, well, ag's a big $1 trillion market. That's easy.
Yeah. Well, it's made up of lots and lots of submarkets.
And you better know your submarket and how you're creating value.
Yeah. Great points. I'm going to zip back to Kathrine for a sec, and I want to just start by asking you to dive a little deeper into this concept of a lot of these misconceptions that people have about ag tech, because as investors, David just talked about the long time frames and all of that, and the diverse nature of this space. What do you think we can be doing to make this more clear for investors? Certainly doing research reports like you just did is a really great start and awesome activity. But what do you think the biggest misconceptions are, and then how can we help to clarify those?
Well, I think Eric addressed to some extent one of the biggest misconceptions, which is this is really more about the technology than it is about the farmer. And so a lot of what we talk about in impact investing, broadly speaking, is that if you're not really paying attention to the end user of whatever it is, whether it's in ag tech or whether it's in renewable energy and that type of thing, if the communities who are most impacted by it aren't engaged, then you're really sort of fundamentally missing the opportunity. So I really appreciate and applaud what Eric was saying with Tortuga, that if you start with the farmer in mind, that really sort of it changes the whole paradigm. So the reason that there's skepticism is it's not for it wasn't a made up reason to have skepticism, because there really was a lot of technology that was out there that was benefiting the investor and benefiting the technologist, but at the end of the day wasn't designed to pay attention to the total needs of the farmer. The other thing I think is important is to understand that sometimes I think these technologies end up going at a certain opportunity and trying to solve a certain problem without looking at the big picture. And when you start to realize all these unintended consequences, again, because you haven't really stopped to understand, as David said, the entire value chain, everything that's kind of going on around it, these unintended consequences of any type of new technology becomes hugely problematic. And so really, I think, investors are getting a lot smarter about asking those questions. And the companies are getting smarter about, understanding how there are these unintended consequences. But when you don't just look at it as a consequence, as a financial consequence, but also a social or environmental consequence, you're really limiting the effectiveness of what you're doing. And frankly, from the point of view of investors who care about impact, they care as much about, in often cases, they care as much about those other unintended or sometimes intended consequences of social and environmental factors. So, I think, as we say, with all of the kind of ESG, environmental social governance world, you need to be doing risk analyses, whether you're an investor or a company. And those risks, again, are not just financial, but they're looking at the total risk of an investment and the total risk of a product or a portfolio company, inclusive of the environmental and social factors. So I think, in answer to what do you do about it as investors, I think that's what we do. People who are smarter than I am on sort of social marketing and that type of thing, I think we might want to, ask them, should we stop talking about it as ag tech? Because there is such a negativity around it. There may be ways of reframing all of this to say, these are, new technologies that have, I don't know what it is, but, some way of really reframing it so that the positive impact environmental and social is really built into it, because right now it is, in some ways, ag tech can be synonymous with negative externalities and impacts.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly we struggle with the name of impact in general, as well as
Yeah.
ag tech. That, as you know, we're very much interested in impact investing, but struggle with that title and the preconceptions people bring with that. And one preconception being that you can't make money in impact, which is very not true.
Not true.
But let me flip those unintended consequences to Eric for a subject that I know you have thought deeply about, and that is, all right, the more successful you are, the more jobs you're killing of people who are out there harvesting, and that would be an apparent unintended consequence. But I think you've got some thinking behind that thinks more big picture.
Absolutely. I think this is the obvious first instinct for a lot of people to say, well, robots are going to take people's jobs away, and isn't that a bad thing? And we have two broad answers to this. In the first place, we thought this initially too, until we talked to farmers. And farmers literally everywhere around the world will tell you, we can't find enough people to do the work we need to do on the farm. We cannot find them. We're having to try to find people there are now stories of people trying to put planes of folks from the Philippines together to come out for the summer to Europe to harvest. There are stories in Mexico of labor shortages in the production region, so they have to go further south to try to find people in Honduras and El Salvador to come up, and they're literally busing people all over the place just to get the job done. So there really isn't a problem of eliminating jobs. What there is a problem of is a lack of people who are willing to do the work that we need to do to have the type of food that we want to eat as a society at the scale that we are today. So we are developing essentially a co-robotic system anyway. We're developing a system that does this dull, dirty, dangerous job of harvest, but we're not going to be able to do a lot of the jobs that the human beings who are now on farm can do if they don't have to do the harvest. So you have robots doing harvest, you have people doing other jobs that right now are not being done because there's just not enough people going around. And in doing those other jobs, now you have more yield, now you have healthier crops, you have better quality. So it truly is in the same way that, cars didn't eliminate all of the jobs around the horse economy. Robots, I don't think will completely eliminate all of the jobs around the manufacturing economy and everything else. Now, there's a lot of conversation to be had there, and this is the second point. So the first point is it's actually in agriculture, not actually labor shortage. In the bigger point on societal automation, we think back to, industrializing London in the 1800s. And at some point it became illegal for children to work in factories. And that was actually a very economically devastating decision for a lot of families. But what it wasn't, it was a morally bad decision. It was the right thing to do, so long as society provided those children a better opportunity through education or other work means to have a career. And so when we think about the broader impact of automation in agriculture or elsewhere, we purely think about, how do we provide employment pathways for robotics technicians who we need and we can't find enough of? How do we provide apprenticeships or vocational training for people so they don't have to go to a 4-year liberal arts college and take a bunch of debt to have a healthy career in hard engineering disciplines? And how do we make sure that is done at a societal level with enough governmental and business support that, we have a healthy society in combination with automation, in combination with AI? That's sort of our general take, is it's the right way to go, but you need to do it thoughtfully as a system.
Yeah, well, certainly, I remember, 30, 40 years ago, all the discussion was about, oh my gosh, computers are going to make people irrelevant.
Right.
That's going to take away all the jobs. And those folks never really thought about the massive industries that would come up with, designing, building, programming, computers, and then of course how everybody would use them to increase productivity and make products cheaper and faster, better, and all of that. So
yeah, exactly.
That's a point well taken. And Doug Mandick points out in the chat that his mom used to be an operator. One of the
phone operators, exactly.
And so the electronic switches came in, and boom, she was out of business overnight. And but actually, overall, it's a good thing. There are some transitional issues, and I think government is getting better at realizing, what retraining programs look like and so on. And Doug's mom has done fine.
So done fine.
Doug, you can chime in, by the way, and talk if you care to.
Peter, I've been to some of the large, and probably a number of other folks have, some of the new large indoor farming facilities, and that's kind of another one of those trends that some people think it's going to stay a niche, and other people think it may be a big tsunami. But downtown Chicago, there's 60 employees in a couple of facilities that are both food deserts and employment deserts. And there's going to be about another 300 coming in the next couple of years. And the same thing's happening with App Harvest in Appalachia, where they're putting in a $100 million facility in a very impoverished area of Appalachia. So some of this kind of comes full cycle, and it really depends on which, again, the marketplace is so big, or this whole environment, when you really call it food tech, that you're thinking about, you remember that it's food that's being produced. There's a dislocation or potential dislocation one place. There's some opportunities being created that you wouldn't have thought about even 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's huge. And, I'll just say one thing that's interesting about being in the venture capital world is we see bubbles of a lot of something coming through, so a while ago it was like all drones,
Right.
And in this last year, I've probably seen at least a dozen indoor farming or containerized farming, or out, on the outside of buildings or roofs of buildings or lobbies, all of these spaces that currently are doing nothing, that are now, working on the vertical farming systems to use them in productive ways. And I went out to Portland last month and saw, some companies who are doing that kind of stuff. And it's pretty cool. And, when you see 10, 12 pitches for something similar, there's a trend. It's a little scary as an investor.
Scary as an investor.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you wonder about, so with that being said, Eric, I'm curious about, you're clearly a leader in this space. What is the competition doing, and how's your product? We did get a question in the chat about what's the status of your product
status
compared to those other guys.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with where we are, and then I'll talk about competition. We raised this latest Series A on the back of a number of large scale multi-year commercial contracts. And of course, all of the companies in our industry are starting from essentially zero. There's nobody who currently harvests fruit commercially except for us, as far as we know. So we are getting paid. We received our first cash payments, which is going to be recognized as revenue, and we are scaling up into the existing contracts that we have. And we could have signed up 10 times, 300 times as many people, but the question is, can we actually satisfy the demand? No. So we just signed up the customers we were able to choose and to work with to start the process of commercializing. And so we're in this phase of our journey where we've proven that, the core thesis was actually right. And a lot of these indoor farms and a lot of this big money coming into large scale glass houses and greenhouses and tunnels is proving our initial thesis right. What we haven't proven yet as a business is, does it scale? We've built robots, we've built fleets of robots, multiple fleets of robots that pick fruit and pick it good enough for the customer to be excited and want a lot more of them. But have we proven that we can actually operate reliably on farms repeatedly at scale? And that's the next 2 years for us. And if we can do that and show, we've also started to show we've picked our first crops in our second crop. We have another crop that we think is on the horizon for the next 18 months. Our Series B should look like, we've showed that we can work at scale on these core customers. We have 5 or 10 more in that first market that are raring to go, and a huge pipeline behind that. We're already starting that same process in our second crop. And by the way, there's a third crop that we've already started a prototype, and that is a significant Series B. That is a 32 SPAC level Series B. Now, the big risk with our company is, can we get there? So that's the progress for us. In terms of competition, there are people out there, who are trying to harvest fruit or vegetables with robots, but it's such a big space and such a hard problem that it's just not competitive. like we've never been in a competitive bid with the customer. Some of our customers have tried some of our competitor robots, but they haven't liked them. And so it's pretty easy for us to come in and say, hey, ours actually works, and we're not in the media saying that it works when it doesn't. Do you want to try? And they say yes. And so it's been, a journey where we sort of feel like the only thing in our way is ourselves, and we really just have to execute on this really difficult problem. And if we can't do it, maybe nobody can. And some clear examples of this are, 6 months ago, I would have said two of the leading competitors in our space were Root AI or Abundant Robotics. Root AI was a tomato harvesting robot company that just was acquired by AppHarvest in what many would characterize as an acqui-hire. And they might even themselves, if you ask them over a beer, I'm not sure. And then Abundant Robotics, which was a leader in the space, had raised money from GV, Google Ventures, and was certainly seen as one of the leaders. Just announced that they were dissolving, a few weeks ago. So it isn't so much a problem of competition. It's a problem of can it work, can it scale, and that's sort of where we are. And that's truly the story of our whole space. I think the only place that robots in agriculture don't apply to that is there's a bit more competition in weeding. There's a lot of companies now at the Series A or B level that are trying to be commercial weeders because it's an easier technical problem to solve. Not easy by any means, but an easier technical problem to solve than harvest. And some of these companies, we particularly know the guys at FarmWise really well, are sort of leading the way, trying to show that can scale and can be an economic proposition. But other than that, competition is not the problem for our space.
Yeah, that's
Peter,
really interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Peter, can I make just a real quick comment on and I think this kind of goes to exit and investor mentality of 15 years ago. I mean, when we started Machinery Link, John Deere was the only exit. And through across a whole lot of crop areas that it had to be one of two or three strategics, whether it was Monsanto or Syngenta, that was your exit. And that really, I think, blocked venture and investment coming in because you had a single pathway. They are still okay as exits, but now things like AppHarvest, there's so much capital flowing in, private equity groups that could take out venture. I think that's really helped the whole space get energized, that it doesn't have to be a single. Once Blue River bought one robotics company, did that kill the whole robotics area in ag? And the answer is, of course, no. But 10 years ago, it would have, because, hey, they made their bet. So I think that's great news for early stage investors, or really investors all along the chain, that you don't have to think about a single exit the way you did 15 years ago. I think it was literally, there weren't other ways to exit besides that. So that's a real positive.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's great. I want to go way back to 1219 to Bob Goodman's question about if you saw it coming along. He asked, would SaaS technology that is helping cities grow and maintain their tree assets be considered ag tech, or does it only apply to farming and presumably food? I'll give that to Kathrine, if I could, sort of in terms of thinking about this question that we've been talking about. Is what is the scope of this? And does it go to the smart cities, type technologies as well?
I mean, I would say that I think generally folks would not put that into the space of ag tech, but also, so what? I think what we have to do is we have to break down some of these siloed ways of thinking about strategies as only being ag, or only being, water, or only being smart cities, or whatever. We have to really start to think so much more holistically about the interrelationship between things like, urban trees, and what does that do for carbon? And carbon impacts, agriculture, and agriculture impacts trees, and so on and so forth. So, I don't know. I'd love to hear whether Eric and David think differently. Probably it wouldn't technically be, but I also want to say I don't think we should get too fussed about what fits into a certain category or what doesn't. From an investor point of view, I think that we would look at things like urban tree built growth as probably a little bit more in the public sector arena than we would in the investor arena. And I'm sure there's probably a play right there, even if it's a low interest loan that filters through some kind of, I don't know what the tool would be, but I I wouldn't generally put it in there. What do you feel differently?
I would just usually go by who the customer is. I agree with you that it's potentially related to climate tech, impact tech, or smart cities. But if you're an investor, hopefully you're not thinking about those terms limiting your view, and instead thinking about what's the impact happening to the end customer, and therefore what's the value in the world being created.
Yeah. With that, I'll take it over. Speaking of things that are sort of outside of what we've been talking about with ag tech, James Foy had a question about, or want to make an observation about blockchain and food safety and rural economic development for the state.
So, Peter, thank you for your time. So about going on 3 years ago, I was the person behind it, and then I was the vice chair of a study came from the legislature and the Colorado Department of Ag about blockchain, food safety, and rural economic development. The genesis of the legislation came from Jensen Farms. When the cantaloupes killed everybody, started off with Rocky Ford, which ended up being Grenada, devastated a lot of people. During that study, all these topics we talked about, there's too much unpacked in here. But if you go to that study, one of the points we brought up was education, about how to work with Colorado State University. Fortunately for Colorado State University, the newish dean comes from rural Colorado, Dr. James Pritchard. And then also we put an emphasis on working with the community colleges and training them. If you want to see where things are going and where the evangelization, start off with that, say, this is something we went on 3 years ago. One final point, when we're talking about ag commodities, if you really want to look at a case study, look at why is there different prices between Pueblo chili and Hatch chili. If you want to see like where my background is, look at where that is, and then look at the overall pricing differentiation between it too. So, I mean, there's so much to unpack here, and you've hit on so many different topics. I mean, and my background, my family worked the fields back in Lamar. So this area is very, very, very sensitive and very close to my heart. So apologize if I've kind of run on and did a huge dump. So thanks, Peter.
Sure, no problem, James.
Thanks, James.
I don't know if you have any responses to that, any of you. It's a little bit out of your particular zones, but all right. Well, thanks for the elucidation. Definitely appreciate that. We do have one from Kyle about which areas of ag tech aren't getting enough attention relative to their importance. That one's, I'll just say, Kyle, for me, that one's a little bit of a stumper. I'm trying to think. I'd almost have to look at that list of things, but I don't know if you guys have a guess at some things that
I'll jump in with one that I in preparation for this, I kind of emailed some people I think are smart, and the word food security came up, that and James really kind of mentioned that with the blockchain. But you think about the grapes you're getting in the store in the winter come from Chile, and they may have gotten shipped to China before they ended up, and that both creates a food security from what's been sprayed on them and a tracking, but also what happens if that chain of gets broken like it did in the pandemic, and what impact is that going to have? And again, you could have some big thoughts about, does that help drive indoor ag? Does it drive the Midwest to being less commodity production and more back to fruits and vegetables that you actually eat? When you think about food security, it could unpack, again, a whole lot of things. What do you do with Africa? And does that mean no more exports from the US? Because that doesn't really help African food security. So that is a broad topic, I think, can really have a lot of interesting subtopics under it that take off a lot of different directions.
I think the only other thing I would add, I mean, I'm biased. I think that even with the new attention given to what's quote unquote called indoor ag, or I would particularly call controlled environment ag, and I would exclude vertical farming from this, sunlight driven agriculture that is using simple technologies like hydroponics, which is really just drip irrigation, It's big and it's getting bigger. Equilibrium just raised $1 billion fund, but it needs to be even bigger. I think there's a lot more to be done in sustainability, and that's of course our particular area. I think the robotics is underrepresented, but I'm biased. And I do think that's this sort of regenerative agriculture in the classic sense of what that means is still underrepresented. I think there's a huge bubble now in carbon in the soil, and anytime that big business, the USDA, and huge venture funds all align within 6 months around an idea in agriculture, it makes me nervous. Like, I'm not sure what's actually happening here. But I do think there is a lot of potential in the soil for carbon capture and sequestration. It just needs to be done the right way. And I'm not convinced that we are doing it the right way. There's a lot of good thinking been done in some articles saying, what do you mean by regenerative agriculture, and where in it is real impact for the environment versus window dressing? And I think that's an area that particular question is not getting enough attention.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's, I always flip this to role of what investors can do. And I think, one theme I'm hearing is there's a lot of public, press releases and public stuff about things that are just not quite there yet. And I mean, we're not out to hurt people, but we kind of do due diligence. We look at things and we either invest or we don't. And we don't do a press release saying, hey, we found this thing is totally bullshit. One reason, of course, is, half the time when we don't invest, they come back 6 months later, got traction, fixed whatever it was. And, oh, no, it's not totally bullshit. So anyway, but there are some scary points about that. I'm going to give with one more question on here, or just a comment. I don't know, Jay, if you want to talk a little more about the data that you're doing in Ornavera, or or if you just wanted to post that and leave it at that.
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder located here in Colorado of a company called Ornavera. So we're all about helping the grower from an agnostic standpoint, doesn't matter what the crop is, to be able to capture the data and to display it in a very simple way and an affordable way so they can understand what's going on with their crops. So it's deployment of field data collection device that has multiple different sensors on it. We can measure the air temperature, humidity, PAR, or the important elements of light, whether it be indoor or outdoor, and then sensors in the soil or substrate that's measuring volumetric water content, MPK, EC levels, both pore and bulk EC, pH, and then we developed a low-cost dendrometer that attaches to the stem of the plant, assuming the plant has a stem, and that is measuring the growth fluctuations in the stem, which the stem is the heartbeat of the plant. So this is really about understanding all those variables and then displaying that in a simple UI that helps the grower really understand what's going on with their crops. And once you've got that solid data set, then you can start applying predictive analytics and other AI tools like machine learning to really start squeezing that down as far as the efficiency and the quality of the crops.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are now 1:01. So we have had a fabulous hour together. So I do want to thank Kathrine, Eric, and David, and all of you for participating. This has been really great. We will have this recording. We'll add it to our library of content. And do visit us at the Colorado Capital Conference on August 24th through 26th. We'd love to see you there. But have a good day. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.